Right. Now I want to cover the final topic of chapter two, which we have never discussed before in class, and apparently was never asked before in the examination, but who knows? Which is 2.8. Describe the legislation of the competition policy in Switzerland, constitution, law on cartel, law on internal market, price controls, and so on. Right. Well, first thing that we should explain is what do we mean by competition policy? Um, and why do countries have competition policies? Well, basically because we understand that competition comes with a number of benefits, right? Low prices, diversity, high quality. So that's usually good for consumers. There are exceptions. There are exceptions where it's better to have just a single firm producing for everyone, especially when there are big economies of scales. But in that case, it's often the government that produces. But mostly for otherwise, if there are no significant economies of scale, it's great to have competition. And so countries they design and implement a competition policy whose main objective is to ensure that uh, firms within a particular market are going to compete and that competition will work well, that the mechanism of competition is going to function properly. So it is expected to provide the intended benefits. Okay. So we basically, the objective is to prevent any type of unfair competition, anything that can restrict competition in the market, anything that can work against the interest of consumers, for example. That is the purpose of the competition policy. And every country, in fact, pretty much every developed country, has a governmental agency that is often independent, but not always. And this agency is responsible for ensuring that markets work competitively. There are several layers for this competition policy. I've just identified a few elements, and I will pause the video and I will write a bit more. But perhaps the first thing that we should mention is that in the Swiss federal constitution, or the confederal constitution, there is one article, which is Article 94. Try to remember it, and I'm going to read it to you. So it's called Principles of the Economic System. The Confederation and the cantons shall abide by the principle of economic freedom. They shall safeguard the interests of the Swiss economy as a whole, and together with the private sector shall contribute to the welfare and economic security of the population. They shall endeavor within the scope of their powers to create favorable general conditions for the private sector. Okay. And that is the part that, like, the next part is going to be the one that is interested. Any divergence from the principle of economic freedom, and in particular, measures designed to restrain competition, shall be permitted only if they are provided for in the federal constitution or based on cantonal monopoly rights. So you see, what you have to understand is that these measures that can restrain competition, they can be allowed, but only if they meet certain criteria, which means that generally speaking, they are not allowed. So that's the first part of the Swiss competition policy. It's just the framework, okay? But most importantly, there is one act that is called the Cartel Act. So it's like a set of rules. An act is basically a number of laws that are passed all together that form like a body of laws. And the Cartel Act is basically okay. I'll talk about that later. So first, what is a cartel? A cartel is a group of businesses, often businesses, which have decided to collude rather than to compete. To collude means to work together, say, oh, we are in a market, we are competitors, we can either fight or we can either cooperate, right? We can work together. Why should we fight? If we fight, if we compete, that's going to be bad for us because we are all going to charge very low prices. We will need to spend a lot of money on advertising, research and development. So we'll make low profits. How about we don't fight? How about we collude? This process is known as collusion, okay? And the businesses which take part in this cooperation rather than competition, they form a cartel. Just like countries who are part of a preferential trade agreement, they form a trading bloc, okay? So that's a cartel. And it's illegal in most countries. In fact, in probably all countries, it's illegal because we understand that this goes against the interest of consumers. If firms agree not to fight, not to compete, they will charge high prices, they will sell low quantities, so that's bad. So cartels, and that's the Cartel Act, makes collusion illegal. I'll skip that for now. And of course, how do we know whether firms fight or cooperate? Well, we need to investigate. We need to screen the market to try to analyze the behavior and the strategies of businesses and determine whether or not they actively engage in competition or whether there is a suspicion of cooperation, of collusion. The problem is that it's not always easy to find evidence, right, that they work together. Because in fact, there are two types of collusion. One type of collusion is known as explicit or formal collusion. This happens when firms, they actually meet, they gather, they sign an agreement. Of course, they do that secretly, okay? But they are like documents, they are meetings, they are communication between them. And this type of collusion is, of course, easier to identify and punish because you can collect evidence of this cooperation and therefore you can punish those firms. So that's explicit or formal collusion. There is another type of collusion which is much more difficult to identify, which we call tacit or implicit collusion. This is a situation where firms, they effectively cooperate, but they never really communicate directly. They never meet. Like, people don't meet. They don't talk to each other. So they don't produce any evidence that they are working together. And if you don't gather any evidence, you can't really punish them. So how does this work? How can we cooperate if we never talk, if we never meet? Well, we can simply communicate through market signals. Imagine that take an example of two companies who produce smartphones, and one of them sets, let's say, a price for its phone. Let's say 500 francs. And the other firm is introducing a new phone and has to decide what the price is going to be. Competing, being aggressive, would probably look like charging a price that is lower than 500 francs. Okay, maybe 450. And maybe the other firm will have to respond, say, oh, 420. Okay, that's price competition, where you try to undercut the other firms to charge a lower price than the other firm. This type of behavior, let's say aggressive, competitive, would suggest that, okay, I don't want to cooperate. But what if I introduce my phone and I charge exactly 500 francs, exactly the same as the competitor? In that case, basically the message that I send to the other firm, to my competitor, is, I don't want to fight. I don't want to fight you. I don't want us to start a price war. Okay? So just looking at the pricing strategy of the other firms, we can gather information on their intentions. Do they want to fight? Yes or no? Or do they want to cooperate? And of course, in that case, if we simply follow what other firms are doing just by looking at their pricing strategy or their marketing strategy. And if we behave in a way that is really not aggressive, we just replicate. So, okay, well, same price. Well, this is a form of collusion. We do not compete, but we don't, it's impossible. It's very hard to find evidence, and therefore it's very hard to punish them. But this Cartel Act has put together a commission that we call the Swiss Competition Commission, which is sometimes just called COMCO, for Competition Commission, COMCO. And it gives power, this Cartel Act, it gives COMCO, the Swiss Competition Commission, it gives it the power to investigate those business practices and to punish, to most usually by setting fines, to give some financial penalties to businesses who have been found for engaging in unfair competitive practice. So, for example, the formation of a cartel. We'll see that there are other possible ways in which you can engage in unfair competition. So the Swiss Competition Commission can investigate, it can define sanction, and something that is pretty cool, it can set up what we call leniency programs. Think about this. If you are part of a cartel, you know you are doing something wrong and you are afraid that you're going to be caught and that you're going to be punished. How can the Swiss Competition Commission encourage those firms who are part of this illegal agreement to come clean, to say, yeah, okay, it's true, we cooperated, we formed a cartel, sorry. Well, you can design what is called a leniency program, where you basically forgive the firm who comes clean, you know, just say, oh, okay, remember what we say in French, faute avouée à moitié pardonnée. So basically, if one of these firms that have taken part in these illegal competitive practices informs the Swiss Competition Commission about this cartel, then it's going to get a reduced fine, or sometimes no fine at all. So of course it's very appealing, you know, if you are part of this cartel and you say, I don't really trust the other firm. I feel like this other firm may just inform the commission because it wants to get a reduced fine. Clearly, that's something that makes collusion much more difficult, because each firm that participates in this illegal agreement has an incentive to cheat on the agreement and just come clean, inform the commission that they are doing something illegal, so at least it gets a reduced fine. So that's what we call the leniency programs. Apart from fighting cartels, so those firms who engage, who cooperate rather than fight, it also prevents abuses of a dominant position. A dominant position is basically a market power. If one firm, so for example, monopoly, right? If one firm has a lot of market powers, like a lot of market shares, that makes this firm price maker, right? It can influence the market price. And possibly it can set high prices that can be against the interest of the public. There is a very famous example of what we mean by a abuse of a dominant position. So let me tell you the story, and I'm sure you're gonna remember it. So there was this guy in the US, which his name is Martin Shkreli, K-R-E-L-I, I think, Shkreli, Martin Shkreli. He was a hedge fund manager. So basically, he was the head of a big financial institution. So a rich guy. And his organization purchased a pharmaceutical company. So his company bought another company, and the other company was producing medications. And so in particular, this pharmaceutical company was producing a very special drug, which was produced to treat patients who were affected by a disease that is known as toxoplasmosis. It's a disease that is transmitted by cats. And in fact, if you have cats at home, it's very likely that you were infected by toxoplasmosis. It's a very common disease. But for the vast majority of the population, you don't have any symptoms. It's just, you don't even know that you caught it. But unfortunately, for some people, it's a big deal. It's a life-threatening disease, and it requires treatment. Otherwise, you die. And guess what? This pharmaceutical company was the only one in the world producing this medication. Why was it the only one? Because there were very few patients, right, who were affected by this disease. And so this guy, Martin Shkreli, he took over this pharmaceutical company and started looking into the assets. Okay, so what do we produce? And he had a look at this drug. And at the time, this drug was sold at $12 per week. I don't remember if this was a shot or a pill, but you basically had to take a dose per week, and it cost $12. So, okay, that's not too bad. Let's say $60 per month. Okay, for most American households, right? And then he said, but why is it so cheap? We are the only ones producing this drug, so we don't face any competition. So we have a dominant position. We have a strong market power. And people need that to survive, right? They need this drug. So why is it only $12? They will be willing to pay any price. And so overnight, he decided to increase the price from $12 to $720. So let's calculate the percentage change. Economically speaking, is it smart? Yeah, you know that the demand is very inelastic. You know that people will be willing to pay any price for your product. So if you want to make as much money as possible, you just charge a very high price. Is it ethical? I think you know the answer. And that's why this guy is often known as the most hated guy in America. So this is an example of what we mean by abuses of a dominant position, because there is a difference between having a dominant position, having a market power, and abusing this market power. Having a market power just means, okay, well, maybe we are the only ones selling this product. But that does not necessarily mean that this business is going to choose to charge a super high price for it. Same thing when you are, and anybody who has some authority or some power, like as a teacher, I have the authority to give you guys a detention. I can do it, right? If I choose that, okay, Constantino, Maya, Nastya, next week you have a detention. I can do it. Because I have a dominant position in the sense that I have a certain amount of authority. I can do it. But doing it would be an abuse of a dominant position in the sense that this would be doing something that is not justified. And that's exactly what Swisscom and the Cartel Act are fighting. They are trying to identify situations where businesses who have a strong amount of market power take advantage and engage in practices that are excessive, that are unfair, that are abusive. That's an important aspect of this Cartel Act. Finally, I left it for the end. The Cartel Act also controls mergers or acquisitions, takeovers. Basically, a merger is when you have two firms that decide to just form one. Okay, so they say, oh, okay, we work in the same industry. We used to be competitors. Let's just form a single economic entity, single business. And well, there are some advantages. Now that you have a single firm, they can produce more, so they can take advantage of more economies of scale. They can also have more financial means to innovate. And so this could be good for consumers. You have like better quality, better products, lower cost of production. All right, potentially. But there is also a risk. The risk is that now, when you have two firms who used to compete and they now decide to merge, well, they no longer compete. They work together, basically. They are the same entity. And so there is a risk that this new big organization is going to have more market power, is going to face less competition, and might abuse its dominant position. It might charge higher prices. There is also a risk that there will be less product diversity for firms, because now there is a single firm rather than two. So maybe some products will be discontinued. So whenever two organizations want to merge, they have to request the authorization. So they will say, hey, look, dear Swiss Competition Commission, we would like to merge. Do you allow it? And then the Swiss Competition Commission is going to investigate. Say, okay, well, what would be the benefits? What would be the cost, right? From the perspective of consumers and society overall. And the Swiss Competition Commission will only allow the merger to go ahead if it is proven that the benefits outweigh the cost. That's also an important aspect of the Cartel Act. Okay, let me pause the video so I can write more. Right, the last element, so we had the Constitution, we had the Cartel Act. The last element, which I have come up with, is something that is known as the Internal Market Act. En français, la loi fédérale sur le marché intérieur, which you have there, which was introduced was implemented in 1996, I believe. C'est d'entrée en vigueur. Yeah. Most of it, yeah, July 1st, 1996. So it's quite old. And essentially, it is an act that ensures that competition is fair inside Switzerland. I've summarized the three main elements. Okay, it's long, there are a lot of articles, but these are the key elements. First, equal access to everyone. It doesn't matter who you are, if you are an individual, if you are a business, everybody should have equal opportunities, same access to the market. Okay, there should not be any kind of discrimination between businesses. We should not give any unfair advantage to a business or to an individual. So yeah, just to make sure that there is some kind of equity in terms of competition. You can access the market. Anybody is able to offer goods and services. Okay, everybody should be allowed to, just to make sure that it's just like in a race, that everybody started on the same line. That's the number one element. Number two, which is also something that does matter because it does stimulate competition, the recognition of qualification everywhere in the country. It doesn't matter where you studied in Switzerland, for example. It doesn't matter where you get your degree from. In any canton, for example, your qualifications must be recognized in the entire country. And this is something that matters because, of course, it improves the mobility of factors of production. And that is something that enhances competition. Because, of course, if there was some barriers in the terms of the mobility, the geographical mobility of factors of production, well, this would definitely be something that would decrease competition, because each canton would basically have, well, the firms within each canton would have more market power in that case. So the fact that there is greater mobility of factors of production within Switzerland is something that, again, makes the competition more effective. And number three, a clear and fair buying by the government, which means that when the government, when there are public markets, when the government buys goods and services from private firms, it has to be transparent. It has to be fair. We should not favor certain private companies over others, because again, this would be regarded as a kind of unfair competition. So it's important to recognize the importance of fair competition in public markets when the government buys goods and services. So these are the essential elements. We keep barriers to entry to a minimum. We ensure there is like a no discrimination between firms, between households. Everybody has equal opportunities. qualification are recognized all over the country. These are the main elements of the Internal Market Act. So you have basically the three pillars of the competition policy in Switzerland. The Constitution, well, there is just a foundation, just this Article 94. The Cartel Act, which is really an important thing you should emphasize, and this Internal Market Act, the three pillars that you should really focus on if you end up having a question about competition policy in Switzerland.